How is it rocking, Dween Nation? Stay here because we are just about to get underway. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. We put out weekly sports content, and we want to continue to build up Dween Nation and the brand that is Dween Sports. Thank you all, and enjoy. Welcome in, Dween Nation. This is your host, Justin Paez, alongside Genoa Agudelo, and we are back uh, recapping Week 3 and the wild week that it was. I feel like Week 2 is more of the exciting, thrilling. There was a bunch of upsets as well as this week was, but Week 3 was kind of a weird week. A lot of poor playing, especially in a game that we'll cover in, I believe, this episode with Anthony Richardson and Caleb Williams. What a tough game that was. But just a lot of tough games, a number of injuries, of course. And we're going to talk about all 16 games that happened on the slate, as well as a waiver wire show. So just stay tuned in that area because we're going to split, the fantasy reactions into 2 episodes for you guys, so it's more digestible. And then we'll have a waiver show. So stay tuned on those. But before we dive into the first part of fantasy reactions, Genoa, how you feeling?
Dween Nation, how's it going, you guys? Hey, it was a pretty crazy week, Justin. I'm not gonna lie here. Week 3 was pretty bananas there. A lot of things we didn't think would happen happened, Justin. If we had a bingo card going into this weekend and we had some things we thought would happen, we would lose, Justin. We would not win bingo. This was an absolute crazy week. And I'll say it again, I'm probably gonna say this every week of the season. This is what makes the NFL the NFL. It's what makes this sport so exciting, just because you're not going to know what you're doing pretty much. This was such a fun week. There were some bad losses, some ugly losses. And Justin, jobs are officially on the line after this week. There are some coaches, I believe, that are on the hot seat. There are some players. The positions are now on the line. And so I'm so excited to get into it, Justin. It was a great week.
No, I agree. It was a really, I'm in 10 leagues, and I actually lost in 8 of the 10 leagues this week. It's a rough week, and to be honest with you, I was doing really well in a couple of them through the 12 o'clock games, and then 3 o'clock happened, and it was Kyron Williams was my enemy this week, and Amon-Ra did pretty good against me, and some of my players just got hurt, unfortunately. McBride, Devonta Smith, Kyler Murray just didn't play well, and he was looking good after that first drive. But we'll get into that game. But yeah, it was definitely a fun week, weird week. But that's what the NFL is, man. A bunch of upsets. And we're gonna start though. We're gonna start with Monday night. It's fresh on everybody's mind. And there was a blowout, and then there was an upset, and it being a very close game. We'll start with the most fun one to me. Obviously, was the Commanders upsetting Cincinnati on the road. What a game that was. Jaden Daniels, I hope you guys started him. Hopefully he gave you guys a Monday night miracle, because he was phenomenal. Brian Robinson got into the end zone. Terry McLaurin finally had a good game. Put up 100 and a score, so super good there. With Brian Robinson, obviously he only had, 2 yards a carry, 2.1 yards a carry. Thankfully got in the end zone. Same with Eckler. So some very solid performances, headlined by Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. And then on Cincinnati's side, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase finally start linking up. We saw the breakout game. We were always talking about it. Joe Burrow was my start of the week this week due to the matchup that he had against the Commanders. And he showed out. Jamar Chase, 6 for 118, 2 scores. Joe Burrow, 324 and 3 touchdowns. I think they're back. I think their offense is going to start jiving. It's crazy that they're actually 0-3. So no victories for the Bengals. Their playoff hopes are getting pulled away as it gets closer and closer to, as we go further and further in the season. But I expect the offense to they're going to start clicking. And it's going to be like that every week, every other week, depending on the matchup. So that it's a good sign, even though it was a really cake matchup. And then Zach Moss kind of got a garbage touchdown, and they were coming back, and Cincinnati goes all the way down the field. They get to the 1 yard line, decide to give it to Zach Moss. He gets in a quick touchdown. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a great game, but still, Zach Moss he's their goal line back. So when they get in that area, it's about time. And then last thing before I toss it off to you, T. Higgins and Andre Yoshivas. So T. Higgins, The stat line doesn't look great, but he was very close on like 2 touchdowns.
Mhm.
One was a PI that they didn't call, so that was tough. So he does have a bad game, but I think he's a good buy low candidate right now. And then Yoshi Voss gets in the end zone again, so he's on fire. I expect once T. Higgins kind of gets more and more reps that maybe Yoshi Voss fades back just a little bit, but right now he's a really big part of the offense. So I think all around a great fantasy. Everybody was kind of playing very well, and it was a good game to watch.
Yeah, Justin, this was an absolutely fun game to watch. Jaden Daniels, Justin, only has 2 incompletions, goes on the road in Cincinnati and leads the team to scoring 38 points. This offense was so much fun to watch tonight. I underestimated the Commanders going into this week's matchup. I felt that if, the Bengals were to just take a 7-0, 14-0 lead, they would kind of run off away with it. They started off, the first quarter 7-7 there. The Commanders just kind of took off there, kind of scoring, scoring every quarter there, and the Bengals seemed to just not be able to catch up there. And Jay Daniels right here, 2 incompletions is kind of the story of the night. 3 total touchdowns,
Crazy.
one off the ground there. It's unbelievable how the Heisman Trophy winner, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, is able to go on the road in his Monday Night Football primetime debut, and gets another victory for the Commanders. And Justin, they're now up there in that division, tied with Philadelphia, over Dallas and over the Giants. And so the Commanders. One thing I do want to point out, I think Eckler, he scored a touchdown today. I think it was a 24-yard run, which was impressive. It was good to see, Austin Eckler back in the back in the thick of it. But he didn't go out with an injury, so we'll see what happens going forward with that offense. I feel like each week, Eckler's been having a purpose and a role in this offense, so we'll see if that comes to effect. If not, they do have that workhorse and Brian Robinson. And Terry McLaurin, he finally had a great game. We were thinking this was going to be a great season for Terry McLaurin. The first 2 weeks were very underwhelming. You mentioned it last week. If he didn't have a good game this week, you were going to be out on him. It's now that he had a great game. He listened to you, Justin, here at Dween Nation, Dween Sports, and had a great game, 100 yards, touchdown. And so, these two teams, with Cincinnati next week, they go to Carolina. It'll be Andy Dalton home against his former team, the team that drafted him, the team that he spent so much time with. And with the Commanders, they are going to be going to Arizona, which I love Kyler Murray's matchup next week, even though you mentioned he struggled. But this is a great Monday Night Football game compared to the other one tonight. The other game tonight, this was a good game.
Yeah, I think it. I think Washington. I think both offenses. That's signs that maybe things are going to start building up to be better. For McLaurin, I think that was like a huge. He needed that kind of thing. As you mentioned, yeah, I was going to be out on him. So now I'm even still waiting just a little bit. I just wanted to make sure that it's kind of this is not just playing against Cincinnati and I mean, as you mentioned, Arizona next week, good matchup, but then he's got Cleveland and Baltimore, so tough. But then he gets Carolina, so that's easy, and then Chicago, which is hard, and then Giants. It's like a bunch of back and forth actually with easy and hard matchups. But yeah, so if you were about to cut Terry, don't do it yet. Keep a hold of him for now. Jaden Daniels should be in your lineup every week. Joe Burrow, be happy with him. Hopefully you have another guy just in case, not like an injury or anything, but like I think Burrow, he had just had like such a prime matchup. Not every week's gonna be that easy, but Jamar Chase finally had a big game. You're happy with your investment so far on him. I think after this week, so be happy. So yeah, so moving to the next game though, we had that blowout that you mentioned, Buffalo and Jacksonville. And there's not a ton to cover here besides Josh Allen is my MVP favorite right now, killing it so far. And then, I mean, James Cook had a very solid day. They were in such a huge lead again. I guess they didn't really need him. Ray Davis, was getting those late garbage time touchdowns. Same with Ty Johnson, actually. Both scored. And then we saw a big Shakir game. Kincaid got in the end zone. Keon Coleman. It was kind of a frenzy all around. I mean, Keon Coleman only had one catch, so it's whatever. But Buffalo's continuing to just dominate most of the teams they're heading up against. And on the flip side, Jacksonville. I mean, I'm out on just about everybody. That is really rough showing. You were mentioning at the beginning of the episode, hey, head coaches that are on the hot seat. I think Doug Peterson is number one. I mean, in my like predictions preseason, I was saying he was going to be fired at the end of the year. I might even be wrong, and it might be happening sooner than that kind of thing. It's been really rough. Trevor Lawrence, I think, is not the quarterback that we always thought he would be. Going at number one and winning those national championships with Clemson. And ETN actually had a pretty solid yards per carry on the ground, but point total, nothing crazy. Did have 4 catches, but not what you want from your second or early third round pick. And then Christian Kirk, I think that's an interesting line there. 8 for 79. Finally got his targets. Obviously not a huge game. Obviously didn't get in the end zone or over 100, but more promising as maybe that's the kind of guy that you know Trevor Lawrence will start relying on more. And we're hoping Brian Thomas can kind of step into that, but he only gets 5 for 48. Does have 9 targets, so he's getting targeted. Christian Kirk's getting targeted, but the question is, when Evan Ingram comes back, what's it going to look like? So, what were your thoughts of this game, though?
Yeah, Justin, just complete domination from Buffalo there. You mentioned Josh Allen is number one in the leader for MVP this year. He pretty much is. The offense runs through him, Justin. And obviously, James Cook. Um, obviously James Cook is great, great back for their team, and he can also create some plays there on the offense. But it's always going to run through Josh Allen. And 4 touchdowns today. With Jacksonville, I'm unbelievably concerned there with this team. Next week they go to Houston. They play my beloved Houston Texans, and it is a must win for my Texans. I'm sorry to Jacksonville, but for my Texans, we need to win this game because the Colts, they won this past week and they are on the upcome, Justin. They're going to have a great season. They're not out, even though they're starting at a 1-2. They're still have a lot of football to be played there in Indianapolis. So I'm very concerned for Jacksonville. Justin, they have not been able to score much points. They go to Miami week 1, score 17. Last week, they're home at Cleveland, only score 13. And they go on the road and only score 10 tonight. So they got to figure out how to break 20. It's unbelievable how you have a pretty good, a solid, depth chart there. You have Trevor Lawrence, who, he was drafted number 1 overall. He was going to be the next Peyton Manning, so to say, there. And then you have guys like Travis Etienne, who's good in college, good right now in the NFL, kind of have a slow start this season. Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, the rookie out of LSU, and Brian Thomas Jr. Obviously Evan Ingram was out tonight, but Brent Strange, he scored tonight. He could be a guy that you can look over. Obviously, you and I here, my brothers, we have a fan favorite by the name of Parker Washington.
That's right.
And he is our one of our favorite players here in our family just because we're close to him. But he hasn't been kind of getting his targets or even getting the snaps there. So this offense isn't terrible. It isn't crazy good, but there's other offenses like with Daniel Jones, they're able to convert and score points. So I'm very concerned on Jacksonville, and their schedule is not looking so good. I mentioned they go to Houston, and then they come back home and play the Colts, and then they get I think this is a Sunday morning game overseas against Chicago. That's their next 3 games.
They could
So
lose.
Chicago's defense is playing lights out, Justin. Even though they lost yesterday, they're still playing lights out. So very concerned for Jacksonville to potentially start 0-6 or 1-5.
I mean, you could argue. I think Jacksonville might be the worst team in the NFL right now.
Yeah.
The Giants got a victory. They look good. They were relying on Malik Neighbors. Carolina, we saw some major life. They got a victory on the road. And it just comes to a handful of teams. And Jacksonville, as you mentioned, 17, 13, now 10. It's going in the wrong direction. I know it's a tough matchup with Bills Mafia around, but yeah, you can't play like that. But yeah, and before we jump to the next team, I mean, as much as the Texans lost and were embarrassed this week, they're gonna want to get their get back, right? And this division is looking worse and worse. The more the season goes on, Tennessee's looked awful, Jacksonville obviously awful, and the Colts won, but Anthony Richardson looked really bad, made some really bad throws. They relied on Jonathan Taylor, and that worked. And I think that's what they're going to need to do. moving forward. But right now, Houston's looking like the only team that's worth anything right now. So anyway, moving to the Thursday night game, we had Jets and Patriots. The Jets won comfortably, 24-3. We saw, I think, an interesting story. Garrett Wilson got a touchdown, but still, there's some worry there. Can he become that alpha dog? Wide receiver one in fantasy. We haven't seen that connection yet. I think it will build with him and Aaron Rodgers. But I mean, I think you could probably buy him pretty cheap. Whoever is the Garrett Wilson owner in your fantasy league, I think you could try to get him cheap before maybe a breakout happens down the line. But right now we haven't seen it. And then the other story is Braylon Allen is getting touches and he is taking away from Breece Hall. And I think Breece Hall owners don't think, oh my gosh, I had an ultimate bust pick and like it's over. I mean, Breece Hall is going to be good. He's going to get his 15 to 20 touches every week, probably be a top 10 running back. But I think with Braylon Allen's involvement, that RB1 overall discussion is out the window. I think Braylon Allen looks good. He's not. The Jets don't want Breece Hall to get all the touches and then get hurt. So I expect Braylon Allen, who's very capable, to continue to get touches. Take it away from Breece Hall, so fantasy managers might be a little upset, but you still got a top 10 back. But there's definitely worry there. And then on the flip side with the Patriots, we saw Hunter Henry turn back into a pumpkin, which is expected with Hunter Henry. That the exact same story actually happened last year. He was a top 3 tight end through 2 weeks, then fell off, and we never saw him again. And then Ramondre, though, that was the shock of the night. Only 0.3 points. He got like 20 yards rushing and a fumble. We saw the Patriots really just come down and be what we thought they probably would be at the start of the season. But yeah, it didn't look great for them, and we might be seeing Drake May in the future. What are your thoughts, though, with this game?
Yeah, Justin, this Patriots team, I mean, they had a great, week one victory in Cincinnati. They came in week two close to beating Seattle. I think it was in overtime they lost, but this, week they really lost it. I don't know if it was a Thursday night, but Justin, we've seen this situation before over and over again where a team drafts a quarterback in the top, with the top 5 pick, and then they end up starting the veteran. It's just you can't avoid the inevitable here. When you draft this guy, you just got to start him. I believe that yes, the Patriots won week one. They still could have done it with Drake May, I believe. And it's time to put him in. You guys are not going to be playing Jacoby Brissett all year. I don't find that possible. The guy only passed for 98 yards there. 12 for 18, was just not able to move the ball. And I think that was the reason why Ramondre Stevenson struggled. He only had 6 carries, but I only feel like the Jets defense, led by Robert Saleh there, able to create a game plan to force Jacoby Brissett to beat him himself, stopping the run game and letting all the passing, kind of just happen. And I feel like that's going to be, the storyline throughout the season for the Patriots. And I'm going to be honest with you. I like the Patriots. I like what they're doing. They parted ways with Bill Belichick, one of the greatest coaches of all time. He had a great era. But post Tom Brady, the Patriots were so boring to watch. Even that one year where they had Cam Newton for half a season. And it's time to go with the guy that they drafted with the 3rd overall pick. I feel like Drake May gets a benefit. A guy like Demario Douglas, who had a great back half of last season, he hasn't been doing much at all. And I was expecting to see him on one of the waiver wire pickups at some point before week 4 or even week 5. And we haven't seen anything out of him. And I feel like it's very disappointing. We did see something out of Jalen Polk, but Justin, I feel like Jalen Polk would be a great waiver wire pickup with Drake May. I just don't see it happening with Jacoby Brissett. Justin, even a guy like Joe Milton, if you're not ready to put in Drake May, you want to protect him, use your franchise, Joe Milton is another guy who can beat you with his legs. He had a great preseason. And, with the Patriots, they still have time. And I feel like, they're a good team. They just need to start the right guy at quarterback.
Yeah, no, it is inevitable as you mentioned. Drake May will be in probably within the next couple to few weeks. And I even saw an alert with Mayo saying that it will come and it's on the horizon. So we'll stay tuned to that. I think and I even think when Drake May gets into the fold, it might be slow. And I think that's how their offense is run. It's kind of we'll rely on the run and our defense at times to win these football games. So I don't expect like a huge Drake May coming out party if when he gets to start. but yeah, the Jets finally look good. I think that's a good storyline for them. But moving to the next game, we had the Giants upset Cleveland on the road. Malik Neighbors looks like that guy. I think you could argue is the clear front runner for offensive rookie of the year. So he's looked great. Him and Jaden Daniels, I think, are the ones fighting for that award right now. But what is it? 8 for 78, 2 scores against a stingy Cleveland defense, and they get the win. He is phenomenal. If you were able to somehow buy him low after week 1, congrats to you. I think the rest of the season is going to kind of detail how it's been going the last 2 weeks. Obviously, week 2, I was like, they played the Commanders. We need to see it again before, like, to me, it's like legit. And then he played in a rough atmosphere against a good defense, and he cooked him. He cooked them all. So I think he's a top 15 wide receiver rest of the season easily. So Neighbors that's a great story there. Singletary was my sit of the week, so I candidly missed that one. I thought Cleveland's defense was going to put up more of a fight. Devin Singletary looked really good, 16 for 65 and a score, 4 catches and 40 yards on the ground. I mean, through the air. So Singletary, if the Giants offense starts looking like this every week, I mean, I think Singletary and Neighbors and even Daniel Jones are possible starts in your fantasy lineup. I'm not even kidding. It's been pretty interesting for 2 weeks in a row, even though they literally they scored 3 touchdowns and lost last in week 2, but they put up 3 touchdowns again, and they're looking good though, and they get the victory there. And then with Cleveland, we finally saw Amari Cooper. He does leave the game injured, but Amari Cooper got up 2 touchdowns, big there finally. He was a guy I think we talked about last week where, hey, if he didn't do it this week, there was going to be some serious worries. But he holds it. He holds it up. He hurt us, and he scored 2 touchdowns, looking great. Hopefully the injury is not too severe. And then the biggest shock, I was pretty into Deonta Foreman. Waiver wire darling. I thought he was going to come in after getting 14 carries and rule the backfield, and the exact opposite happened. Jerome Ford got 10 carries to his 2 carries. So he was clearly phased out again, or I guess phased out for the first time. And I think it maybe is a tell of this Cleveland offense for, I think, all season. It might be this way. Like it's going to be ugly, and I don't know who you can trust. Even Amari Cooper, who had a big game, there's definitely concern there.
Yeah, Justin, with Amari Cooper, he's kind of looked old all season. Just looks slower than usual. It seems as if his conditioning, his cardio is taking a step back. I'm not sure if age is the thing there going on there because, he is, going up there. He is 30. I still think he has some great years ahead of him, but, he's just looked a little slower than usual. Not the normal Amari Cooper we're used to. Glad he was able to have a better game with 2 touchdowns. With Singletary there, he did have a great game, but he's one of those guys that are like matchup based. I think this matchup was a little bit more tough. But they do have Dallas next week there, Justin. So I'm a little concerned if you're starting Singletary on a Thursday night against Dallas.
Right.
Just a little bit. But Neighbors is a guy that you're going to start every week there. And Daniel Jones, I had this feeling, I did have a prediction, Justin, that Daniel Jones was going to have a great game through the rushing. He was going to have 100 yards, I believe I said. I meant to say he was going to have a great game passing. You know what I mean there. So Daniel Jones had a great game. I don't think there's no interceptions he threw. I don't think he fumbled. So there's no turnovers there for Daniel Jones there. 24 for 34, pretty good there. I think he only got sacked a couple times. So pretty surprising there that he was able to hold his ground against that tough Cleveland defense, that tough pass rush there led by Myles Garrett. And looking at the Cleveland side. You mentioned their carries. Cleveland used to be able to rush the football so well. It seems that this year they kind of forgot it. Stefanski. Even last year when they lost Chubb after week 2. Jerome Ford was a great running back that was getting you 15 to 20 carries a game. He was always getting you a rushing touchdown, if not 100 yards. But Justin, this season it's been tough for the running game to go well. And Justin, they were able to do this well with Joe Flacco there. So. It's a little confusing how with Deshaun Watson back under center, a guy they paid so much money, they're not able to move the football as well, and they're only scoring 15 points against the Giants at home. It's very concerning if you're looking at the Browns. And I'm still a believer in Jerry Jeudy. I loved him out of Alabama. I didn't think he ever fit with Denver, but I feel like that's a guy that Deshaun needs to go to more. He did have 7 targets in this game. So maybe it's just they're not able to connect. They don't have the chemistry. But this is a guy that you're going to need to get the football to win games. Amari Cooper's getting older. Looking at the receiving here, it was Amari Cooper that led them. But after that, there was a running back, a tight end, and then Jerry Jeudy. So some things that Stefanski definitely has to fix as soon as possible. They play the Raiders next week, and I like Antonio Pierce to kind of make some adjustments. He had a pretty strong post conference there. Letting some people know that they might not be playing next week for the Raiders, or maybe they might just be on another team, Justin. So maybe there's some moves there in Vegas we'll get to in a second. So definitely a pretty interesting matchup going into next week.
No, I can't wait to talk about that when we get to the Raiders with that press conference and the business decisions. Very interesting there. But yeah, there's some clear concerns with Cleveland, and quite frankly, I think once David Njoku comes back, I
Yeah,
think it's going to be very inconsistent for all parties in the on the Cleveland Browns offense. So if you have Amari Cooper, I'd probably think trying to sell him high. He got 2 touchdowns, had a good game. But try to get out of those sweepstakes right now if you can. Moving to the next game, we have Packers and Titans, and man, I thought my Titans stat was gonna help us here, and Green Bay hadn't beat Tennessee in over 25 years, but the Packers dominated from the jump, and it wasn't even Jacobs. Jacobs didn't have a big game. It was the defense had a really really great game, had a ton of sacks, a defensive touchdown. Um, and so they looked really good there. Malik Willis had a very solid game. I think he was a top 10 quarterback this week, if I'm not wrong. So he gets his revenge per se on his former team. And Green Bay. I mean, they continue to win with Malik Willis at quarterback. So that's just a testament to Matt LaFleur as a coach. Really great there from him. I guess the last little bit of it, Emmanuel Wilson got a receiving touchdown, got 12 carries. So I don't know if there was some sort of thing where Green Bay was up a lot, so they decided not to use Jacobs, or maybe something's wrong with Jacobs where he might be a little nicked up, or even, Wilson's doing good in camp and is getting his deserved snaps. I'm not sure. We'll see as the weeks continue. And then with Tennessee, man, it's clear that if Will Levis has a good game, or yeah, if he has a good game, then maybe Tennessee has all the skill position players have a good game. But if Will Levis struggles, it's going to be a struggle for everybody. And that bug hit Tony Pollard, who was my start of the week, against a really bad rush defense. I thought it was going to be Tony Pollard all day. It wasn't the case, and then Calvin Ridley unfortunately has a bad game, and Hopkins gets into the end zone. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I'm not buying into Hopkins at all. I'd still much rather have Ridley, and I think Ridley will, get back on track. But because also looking at Calvin Ridley's schedule and the Titans' schedule, it's not too bad for a fantasy perspective. They play Miami, pretty easy. Then they have a bye week. Then they play the Colts, very easy defense. Then they play at Buffalo. It's a tough matchup. Then they get Detroit, New England. Then they have, Chargers, Minnesota, and then Houston, Washington, Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indy, Jacksonville to end the season. So it's a good stretch. So maybe Calvin Ridley, a good buy low, kind of guy right now. Even Tony Pollard. We'll see. We'll see if Tyjae gets, more involved. But there's definitely worries around this Titans team. I think Will Levis, I was expecting maybe a jump of sorts, being with an offensive coach and having some good weapons around him. But he really is. He's fallen back a little bit, and he's made some really dumb plays. So there's definitely worries in Tennessee.
Yeah, Justin. One thing that worries me about Tennessee right now, major red flag, is between their two running backs, and Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, only 8 carries there for only 21 or 8 carries. Justin, with a guy, with a second year quarterback like Will Levis, who's not all the way experienced, who has struggled in his career so far, you got to establish the running game. And Pollard had a great week 1, and we haven't really heard from him much since. Tajay Spears, I remember last year, I know it was a different, coaching staff, but Tajay Spears was taking a lot of Derrick Henry's touches. We figured that he was the next guy in Tennessee's, the history of the Titans, not including the Oilers, but just Tennessee Titans. They've had some great running backs here. Chris Johnson and Derrick Henry, and they have some little bit in between there, and then it's time to see the next you know, running back there in the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, if you consider their whole franchise, you can add Earl Campbell there. He's a former Oiler, Tennessee Oiler, Houston Oiler. I know, but in that franchise, I would say there's been a lot of good running backs historically, and they need their next guy. And I feel like Tajay Spears could have been their next guy, but 2 carries there, Justin, for Tajay Spears. Um, and they're not even using him much in the. He did have 4 catches there, but I feel like he needs to be utilized more there. And it's just if you're gonna need to beat a Packers team, a tough team at home, you're gonna need to establish the running game because I feel like you can get guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley open there. But even like a guy like Tyler Boyd, you can still utilize more, but it really comes through the running game. But looking at the other side, this Green Bay offense is showing to prove that they're going to be a top 5 offense in the NFL. I love what I saw out of Emmanuel Wilson. He looks the part and to be a great, RB2 to Josh Jacobs there. And so I'm very excited to see how that offense can develop there when Jordan Love gets back. From the receivers, nothing much had to be done. They still scored 30 points. Obviously, there was a pick six there by Jerry Alexander. Christian Watson only had 2 catches for 67 yards. He led the whole team in receiving. Looking at what Jaden Reed was able to do, obviously, I feel like he is more matchup based. He's a better start with Jordan Love. But I also like, Romeo Dobbs there. He only had 1 catch. So this, receiving crew was able kind of to take the day off, kind of regroup, and hopefully, we can see Jordan Love back here in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, once Jordan Love kind of gets back, I think things will start even getting more steam will pick up for this Packers offense. I know most of the receivers have been kind of unreliable for 2 weeks now. But Jordan Love, hopefully, his return is on the horizon, which will boost up all their values. Moving to the next game, we had Colts win against the Bears, and what for 3 quarters was some of the worst football I've ever seen. Caleb Williams had 2 picks, I believe, I think he ended up with 3 picks. No, he had 2 picks, and then Anthony Richardson had 2 picks. Caleb Williams also had a fumble, so 5 turnovers, all mostly bonehead plays. But then finally the Colts started leaning on Jonathan Taylor, and he really took over the game. So it was a huge eye-opening moment. Maybe the Colts are thinking, hey, AR is not at the spot we really want him to be. Let's rely on our running back that we paid big bucks for. And I think that might be the case just for at least for the future, especially now next week. I believe the Colts are playing the Steelers, which is a tough matchup for all parties, even Jonathan Taylor. But for Anthony Richardson, I'm a little worried that, hey, if I have the ball in his hands, trying to run around and make plays, we might see what we saw last week, and that's not good. So I expect probably a lot of carries for Jonathan Taylor, because that game's also going to be super close throughout, because Pittsburgh likes to keep games close. And then with the receivers, Pittman, man, he's got one more week to prove it, or I'm out. I'm out. I think you could even cut him if he fails to do well next week. So he's looked really bad. Not I'm not even gonna blame him too hard on his own skill. It's the fact that, hey, Anthony Richardson has not been playing well. I mean, he only completed 10 passes this week. And they somehow won the game. So uh, I think that there's definitely worries there. For really all of them, all the wide receivers. I know Alec Pierce had 2 good weeks. This week wasn't that case. Adonai Mitchell, 0 catches. So very tough there. And on the Chicago side, they were down a lot, so they had to catch up. And Caleb Williams, even though he had 3 turnovers, ended up with 363 and 2 scores. So it's like ugly, but maybe that's going to be the case in a lot of games, and he's got to have to throw the rock. And I expect him to improve on his own mechanics as the season goes on, because he got it to his wide receivers. I mean, Odunze 6 for 112 and a score, a top 10 week. Cole Kmet, I think, is riding high right now as the tight end 1 on the week, 10 for 97 in a score. And then DJ Moore, 10 targets, 8 for 78. Not like the best game ever, but hey, Caleb Williams is throwing the rock. He had to throw it 52 times this week. So, and he's targeting his top guys. So I think that's kind of going to be the story. I think it will get better. They also won't be playing against a bad Colts defense every week. So they're matchup based. I think all of them are matchup based besides maybe DJ Moore. And then the running game. He was another guy, DeAndre Swift. I said, if he didn't do it this week, I'm out. I'm out. I mean, 13 carries for 20 yards is horrendous against a really bad defense. So like, I don't even know what I mean. Like, I guess he's too valuable to drop. But I honestly like if I had him on my roster, I'm like he's clogging up a lane. Like I might just cut him. Like screw it. I mean, Roshan Johnson 8 for 30 had more yards on less carries. I honestly think that you could drop Swift and it wouldn't be a detriment to your team at all. I feel like free. I feel like that like a bad ex-girlfriend kind of thing. Like you feel free and it's all lifted away from you. That's kind of how I feel like about DeAndre Swift.
Justin, I want to add more to your take. That was a good one there. But Justin, DeAndre Swift, to add to what you said, he has 37 carries on the season, only 68 yards.
Wow.
68 yards for 30. A guy like Jonathan Taylor had, 120 yards yesterday with just 20. Like, it's just unbelievable there how a guy can have, and I love Swift. I loved him in Detroit. I loved him last year in his only year in Philadelphia. He's a great player. I loved him in Georgia. So I just don't understand what's going on there. And it's going to be a running back by committee here all year in Chicago, unless an injury happens. It's going to be splits with Herbert, Roshan Johnson, a guy that they love out of Texas, and Swift. So expect that to be a thing all year. And I am staying far as away from Chicago running backs. I mean, I'd rather start like a Bucky Irving from Tampa Bay or
Honestly.
Alexander Madison who's doing not too bad. And obviously, you're going to start a guy like Zach Charbonnet, even with Kenneth Walker being back. So um,
Yeah.
definitely stay away from Chicago running backs. I do like their matchup next week. They're home with the Rams, and the Rams have been one of the worst defenses in passing. This past week, they allowed 3 touchdowns to Jawan Jennings. The
That's right.
week before, Marvin Harrison shredded them for 2 first-quarter touchdowns. And so the Rams defense is very porous. They're going to be on the road next week in Chicago. You could make the argument that the Bears could get to Stafford pretty fast there. Their pass rush is pretty good there. Their defense, even though they're 1-2, is not bad at all. Their defense is not bad at all in Chicago. I've been very impressed to see what I've seen from Chicago.
Yeah.
Um, but looking over to the Colts side, their leading receiver is one catch and 44 yards with Alec Pierce. That is a big no-no there. Even though they won, is Jonathan Taylor going to have this good? Going to have great weeks like that every week? Jonathan Taylor could, but there's going to need some other pieces to go to. But Jonathan Taylor won me a game this week in one of our major leagues, so very happy with Jonathan Taylor right now. So hopefully they keep giving it to him, but they need to feed guys. It's crazy that a guy like Adonai Mitchell out of Texas, who I love, isn't getting any love, any targets there. It's quite crazy. But I feel like maybe this has a lot to do with what's going on with AR. I feel like he could be battling just a little bit of a nagging injury, and it showed me everything I needed to know last week in their loss in Green Bay, where he struggled, only scoring 10 points. They could have won it. He scored 17 or 18. But I'm still a believer in AR. I'm still a believer, in this Colts team. They play Pittsburgh next week at home. That's going to be a tough one, but they do go to Jacksonville and Tennessee, and they get Miami 3 weeks, in a row following the Pittsburgh matchup. So, there's some good, brighter days ahead for Indianapolis, but they just got to get through this week, and then they have 3 pretty fairly easy games there.
Yeah, I mean we'll see. We'll see if they can
Mm-hmm.
pick it up. Both teams. The Bears have a good matchup next week, and the Colts have a tough one. So we'll see how that looks. Now we'll look at a game that was a tough watch from the onset, especially as we are Texans fans here. As the Vikings win 34-7, and they jumped on Houston right at the right at the oh my gosh, I can't even speak. Right at the beginning of the game, it was kind of over. It felt like Houston just had some tough stretches. A lot of offensive line penalties. Laramie Tunsil, bro, hey, we're paying you big money, and we saw what 5 penalties. Very bad there. CJ had a tough interception off of a block pass, so that's tough. I don't really blame him for that. But then it wasn't nothing was really working. Diggs had 10 for 94, so he was getting a bunch of targets against his former team, but doesn't get in the end zone or anything like that. Nico Collins, they were trying to get him a touchdown, especially at the end of the game. I don't know if you were watching that. I know it was Davis Mills in at that time, but 4 straight end zone passes for Nico. They don't score. Um, Tank Dell 5 for 62, so another pretty down game for him. But we talked about this. It was kind of somewhat of a tough matchup. I expect next week to be Tank Dell's week, and if it's not Tank Dell's week next week against Jacksonville at home, I'm out. I'm OUT. I'm OUT. And it's not even his talent. It's not against the talent. It's just too many mouths to feed, and the two guys above him are better than him right now. Diggs and Nico Collins. So there is worry though with Tank. Hopefully next week though is the week he steps back into the spotlight. Cam Akers, not a great game, but they were also down big time, so he wasn't on the field as much as a regular Texans game where it's either close or Houston's up. So I expect if Mixon and Pierce are out next week, there's a chance. I think Cam Akers, you need to keep him on your roster because I think he would have a very good game next week. And then on the Vikings side, Aaron Jones, phenomenal game. Had a receiving touchdown and then 100 yards rushing. So he's looking like a steal of a pick right now based on where you got him in your draft. Jay Jetta's got a touchdown early on, so he's got 3 straight touchdowns in 3 weeks. So he's looking like a steal if you got him, past pick 7. He's looking like Jay Jetta's, and Sam Darnold's looking like better than Kirk Cousins. I mean, he's making all the passes he needs to make. Got 4 touchdowns, so he's revitalizing his career, which is super great. And the Vikings defense, phenomenal. Hey, they're everywhere, making sacks and just being great. I mean, the Vikings are the real deal for me. I think they could honestly win their division. And I know that's right now they're leading the division, so you're like, oh, duh. But, before the season started, I had them in last in the division, right next to the Bears. Because they got a tough go of things. Packers, Detroit, and Jordan Love being injured. But they do have a test next week, even with Malik Willis, even though maybe it's Jordan Love. And if it's Jordan Love, then definitely. But Minnesota goes into Green Bay next week. And if Minnesota wins, I'd argue that they are the top team in the NFC, like a favorite for the Super Bowl on that side of the bracket. I mean, they're killing it. And if they go into Lambeau and beat their, arch rivals, that's phenomenal. And Darnold, I think the week after they play the Jets. So
Oh,
Darnold
Sam
gets his
Darnold.
revenge game very shortly. Hopefully he's not looking too ahead against Green Bay. So we'll see. But yeah, a great game for Minnesota. Houston, not too worried about the future. It's just a very tough game.
Yeah, Justin, as a Texans fan, this one hurt. This was a butt whooping for the ages. One thing that I saw from this game is the offensive line could just not block for CJ. I feel like every time, as soon as he snapped the ball, running for his life there. So this needs some improvements there for the offensive line. Obviously, with Mixon not being there, it was a struggle. But there's gonna be some better. There needs to be some better protection there for CJ Stroud. I honestly don't put this game on him. It was just an overall ugly game. Sam Darnold looked pretty elite there as a quarterback. Um, and Justin Jefferson is still the best receiver in the NFL. Even though Jamar Chase had a great game this past week, Devontae Adams is okay. Amon Ra had a pretty great game. You have to make the argument that Jay Jettis is the best, receiver in the league. I mean, he's been playing with pretty decent quarterbacks with Kirk Cousins and now Sam Darnold, and he's just still able to do it. He's just one of the best players in the league as well. And so with Minnesota though, Justin, this now creates, now that they're 3-0 and they've looked amazing, this creates, they are in a tough division. And now, Justin, this creates matchups between the Bears that I'm dying to see, between the Packers, which I am dying to see, and now against the Lions, which I am so dying to see. And Justin, they play each of these teams twice.
Right.
So anytime Minnesota is playing a divisional game from here on out, as long as Darnold's healthy and Jefferson's healthy and Aaron Jones is playing, a former Green Bay Packer Aaron Jones,
Revenge game.
revenge game next week in Lambeau. This is going to be such a fun game to watch. I'm so hoping that Sam Darnold is healthy, because if so, this is going to be a great game to watch. Obviously, we get the matchup of Zaire Alexander one-on-one with Jay Jettis. And so, a revenge game for Aaron Jones there in the Cheese Land there in Lambeau Field. So, week 4 is exciting, Justin. So, Minnesota looks for real. Well, the test comes next week in Green Bay. Whether Malik Willis or Jordan Love starts. So, like what I'm seeing out of the Vikings there, and with my Texans, I think they should definitely bounce back next week.
especially against the Jags at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think they
Mm-hmm.
usually own the Jags at home, even on the road. I think they
Yeah.
won both last year. So hey, Houston, don't put your heads down too much.
Mm-hmm.
Moving to the next game and last game on this part one of our fantasy reactions, it's the Philadelphia Eagles pulling off a road win against the Saints. It was a win-win for me. I picked the Saints kind of with the thought, hey, if the Eagles win, at least the Eagles won, and I didn't get double wrong. But hey, it was an ugly game for the first half. Devonta Smith was being hyper targeted all game. Um, and then I think it kind of started the bottle, got capped, popped off once Saquon had the 65-yard touchdown, huge play, and then after that it was kind of Philly's game. I mean, Olave did get a big time touchdown. He looked good this week. Shaheed had a goose egg, 0 for 0. So he falls back into that bucket that he kind of always has. He's getting that big touchdown, or he's not getting anything. This week was literally nothing. And then Kamara, he was solid. Uh, he only had what is that, 3 yards a carry, which is meh. But 40 yards receiving, as well as 80 yards on the ground. So he got the yardage. He didn't get any touchdowns. And then on the Philly side, Dallas Goedert, hey, 10 for 170, which is huge. I think he right now just jumps back into it. He's a top 5 tight end as long as one of those wide receivers are out, AJ Brown or Devonta Smith, and they might be missing both next week because Devonta Smith did leave that game with the concussion. Which, for one, I mean, he's one of my favorite players, especially this season. I have a lot, buying into him. But what a dirty hit, man! That guy, I was so mad and sad at the same time seeing that hit that I don't even know who the Saints defender, I think it was Lloyd or something, made that play. Like, it's just so tough, man. I hope there's some sort of penalty on him for doing that. Poor Devonta Smith. They'll probably, if I had to guess, unless Devonta Smith gets a really speedy off of that concussion, I expect them to sit him this week in week 4, because they have a bye week in week 5 as well. So no need to rush him back, kind of thing. But we'll see. Maybe if AJ's out, then they'll need him. They'll need him against, who do they play? They play at Tampa Bay next week. So we'll see. But I expect Devonta to miss a week, so be ready to have a replacement. Um, and then Saquon, of course, RB1 season continues. I think you could argue he might be the top RB for next year's draft coming into next year. I think definitely, barring injury or anything, he will end this season as the RB1. He looks phenomenal, has a good O line, can catch the ball, does everything they need, and in games where Jalen Hurts looks really darn bad, like besides that last couple of drives, he did not play well. They rely on Saquon, and oh my gosh, I feel bad because I have Jake Elliott in a few leagues, and I was like, hey man, prime time to kick some field goals, and they Nick Sirianni, you're not Dan Campbell, brother. You don't go for some. He went for some dumb fourth downs where they should have got points, especially when their offense wasn't jiving. But they go for it and they failed. I think they failed 2 or 3 times. Like, hey, no one to rely on you're one of the best kickers in the league. So tough game. Nobody does super great besides Saquon, Goddard, Olave. Derek Carr, comes back to earth after his, 2 fiery weeks. And I think that, again, that similar to the Rashid Shaheed conversation, like Derek Carr falls back into what kind of is what Derek Carr is. And I think the Saints team is better than, last year's Saints, even with this tough loss at home. But I expect that Derek Carr average to come down as we continue through it.
Yeah, Justin, those were one of my questions. Last week going into this game is, are we going to see this consistency out of Derek Carr? And one thing I compared it to was Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2018, who had an amazing first 2 weeks. Was breaking records, scoring over 35 plus points a game. And here we go. He comes back down to earth, Justin. If they would have scored the same amount of points they scored in the first 2 weeks, they would have won this game easily, Justin.
Yeah.
Only scoring 12 points, not 14, 12. They go absolutely scoreless through the second and third quarter. Obviously, Philly did too. But in a game where you mentioned Devonta Smith goes out with a dirty hit, which the Saints have kind of historically always been a dirty franchise when it comes to defense. Obviously, we had Bounty Gate. We've
Right.
had some issues there with Marshawn Lattimore. During those Buccaneers matchups when Tom Brady was the quarterback. Um, and so looking at it now, Justin, it's one of those things now with the Saints. It's like, oh, here we go again. And I would have loved to see the Saints start off 3-0 and kind of seen them and the Vikings kind of being those, alphas in the NFC, because that would have just made football fun. Two teams with Derek Carr and Sam Darnold respectively leading their teams to 3-0 starts. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case here for the Saints. With the Eagles, I'm a little bit worried about Jalen Hurts. Obviously I'm a big Jalen Hurts fan. There's just something there, even with the addition of Saquon Barkley, who looks phenomenal. You can make the argument that he is also an MVP candidate there as well, Justin.
Right. Yeah.
As non-quarterbacks there, he's having a McCaffrey like of last year,
Yeah.
and Justin, even with him being there, something feels off about Jalen Hurts. I don't know if it's that Jason Kelsey retired. I don't know if it's the new offensive play calling. One thing that we headed to the season that there was news that him and Sirianni have not always seen eye to eye. So
Right.
that is something very concerning there. But I'm going to put it past them. And obviously, they play Tampa Bay, a team. They play Tampa Bay next week in Tampa Bay, a city and a team that they in the same area where they got eliminated in the wild card last year.
Ugly.
And
It was ugly
it's
too.
it was very ugly for the Eagles there. So hopefully they're able to kind of reverse the curse, get their swagger back, kind of thing. Where things went wrong last year can go right now. If they get this victory on the road, they do have they have a bye after, right? You mentioned that
Right.
they do have a bye after the Tampa Bay game. Get things ready, get to go, and then they'll have a pretty decent, fairly easy schedule. They do get Cleveland, New York, Cincinnati. Obviously, we were not really high on Jacksonville. They get each other along the way as well. So definitely is a must win at Tampa Bay to get to that bye week, and then they can come back re-energized and make a run for that number one seed, not only in their division, but in the conference.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, hopefully they're not. I mean, they're facing some demons next week against Tampa Bay, a team that. I mean, they're already in the midst of their collapse, and then Tampa Bay just put the nail in the coffin, kind of thing. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But Dween Nation, this is just part one of the fantasy reactions for week 3. So this see these 8 games that we talked about, and then jump to the next episode, see the next 8 games, and then jump to the next episode, see the waivers show. So stay tuned for that. Jano, send us out.
Yo, Dewey Nation, we're so excited to talk about week 3 here. Very exciting there. We still have a lot more to talk about week 3. There's some, really crazy 3 o'clock games that we got to. Obviously, we want to talk about the Chiefs and Falcons there.
Yeah.
So definitely thanks for giving us a listen. If you like what you see, go ahead and check us out in part 2. And as always, peace.
Peace.